As I mentioned previously, every workbook in Excel can contain numerous different worksheets. And you can have up to 255 worksheets per workbook. So that is a lot of data. So you have the potential to have a lot of data stored within each workbook. The workbook is the overall container that houses the worksheets. So if we take a look at my workbook, this workbook is currently unsaved, but the workbook is called Book 1. And currently I have one worksheet in this workbook called Sheet 1. And you can see that as a tab at the bottom of the screen. And it's fundamental to your understanding of basic Excel to know how to work with your worksheets. So let's take a look at some of the basic things that are important to know. Each worksheet in your workbook contains a grid structure of what we call cells. Each workbook contains columns represented by letters and rows represented by numbers. And these rows and columns, where they intersect, we have what we refer to as cells. And it's in these cells where we type all of our information. And each cell can contain numerous different types of data. It might be that we're typing text into a cell, or it could be that we're typing numbers into a cell. We can type things like percentages into cells, or even dates. And everything you type into a cell in a worksheet can be formatted so that it looks exactly as you want it to look. And as we already know, we identify different cells in a worksheet by using the cell reference. So where the column and the row intersect, we get our cell reference. So currently I'm clicked on cell G5. And it's these cell references that are used consistently throughout Excel when we're building things like formulas, and pretty much when we're doing anything in Excel, it all relates to the cell reference. Now, when it comes to your different worksheets, you'll notice that when you create a new blank workbook in Excel, you're just going to get a default worksheet that's called Sheet 1. And each worksheet contains over 1 million rows. If I click in cell A1 and press Control down arrow, that's going to jump me down to the very last row in this workbook. So you can see there just over 1 million. Control up arrow to jump to the top. If I do Control right arrow, it's going to jump me to the last column. And there are just over 16,000 columns in one worksheet. Control left arrow to jump back to cell A1. So what that means is that within each worksheet, we have roughly 17 billion cells, and we have the potential to fill all of those with data. Now, this is not something I would advise when you start getting into spreadsheets that are that large. You're probably going to find Excel starts to slow down greatly. But just be aware of the potential amount of data that you can squeeze into every worksheet. Now, what about managing different worksheets? Well, again, if we go down to the bottom where we have Sheet 1, this isn't a particularly meaningful name. It's rather generic. So what I would probably do here is immediately rename this worksheet to make it a little bit more meaningful, depending on what I have on this worksheet. Now, I don't have anything at the moment, but let me just show you how you can rename your worksheets. If you right-click on the tab, it's going to pull up that contextual menu, and we have a number of different worksheet-related menu items in here. And one of them is Rename. You can now see Sheet 1 is highlighted, and I can just go in and call it something else. It's also worth noting that to rename, you can simply double-click on the tab, and it will let you rename that way as well. Let's right-click again and take a look at some of these other options. Now, if I want to insert another worksheet in this workbook, I have an Insert option just here. It's going to ask me what I want to insert. The first option that's highlighted is Worksheet, so I'm just going to click on OK, and now I get a brand new worksheet. Now, a much quicker way of doing exactly the same thing is simply to click on the plus just here. So when I click on plus, I get yet another worksheet. And once again, I can right-click and I can rename. So let's call this one Calculations. Let's right-click and call this one Tables and hit Enter. If I want to reorder my worksheet, so maybe Summary needs to be the first worksheet in this workbook, I can simply drag and drop. So let's click on Summary, drag it over. Notice I get that little down-facing black arrow, which is going to show me where this tab will be placed when I let go of my mouse. Let's let go to reorganize those tabs. Let's right-click again. I have a move or copy option in here. So from here, what I could do is I could choose to move or copy this particular worksheet to a completely different workbook that I have open. Now, I don't currently have another workbook open, I just have book 1, but if I was to select New Book and click OK, it's going to move the Summary tab to a brand new Excel workbook. If I want to create a copy as opposed to moving it, I would need to make sure I select Create a Copy. If I click on OK now, what you'll see is that I now have a new book at the top, book 2, which contains that Summary tab. Now I don't need this, so I'm going to do Control W to close this down. Let's right-click one more time, and on the subject of moving and copying, if I want to make a copy of a worksheet within the same workbook, I can simply hold down my Control key, drag and drop, and it's going to make an exact copy of that worksheet. And it will copy across all of the data contained on that worksheet as well. And of course, we can right-click and delete any worksheets that we no longer need. Another cool thing to do is to change the tab color of the different worksheets and essentially color code your workbook. This is particularly useful if you are working on a large project where you have numerous different tabs. Grouping them together using colors is a really nice visual way of adding some structure to your worksheet and letting people know that these tabs are related. So if we right click, we have tab color just here. I can choose green from the palette, and maybe tables and calculations are related, but summary isn't. So maybe I want to make the other two tabs exactly the same blue color. And one final little tip before we move on, if you're interested in knowing the keyboard shortcut to quickly insert a new tab, it is Shift F11. Let's move this by dragging and dropping. I'm going to right click and change the color to blue, and then I'm going to rename this to Pivot and hit enter.